Hey, so I want to talk about one of the comic licenses that really never took off. I guess I shouldn't call it comic license. This is actually something that came from video games that, in the 90s was huge, but it never went anywhere when it came to comics. But it's always something that I personally have always wanted to work on. I always thought that there was a lot of potential for this, and that's in case you haven't guessed it, it's Double Dragon. So it's the story of the Lee brothers. So it's Billy and Jimmy Lee. So back in the early '90s, this was huge. Probably, I mean, there was like Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers, and then there was Double Dragon. At least in the when I was growing up, that was the big video game. I mean, it was bigger than Mortal Kombat, bigger than Street Fighter, and it never really went anywhere. It was. I know there was a cartoon for a while, which kind of seemed a little goofy. I think it was more about like magic than it was martial arts. And then there was the Marvel comic stories as well. There was a movie that was probably it's exactly what you would expect from a cheesy 1990s action movie with B characters and a really bad story. So that didn't really go anywhere. But I also thought there was a lot of potential. I don't understand why there is not, like a retroactive comic for this, because when you start thinking about it, there is a lot of potential with this. It's really a story of two brothers who go on an adventure. It's got a lot of martial arts, which is always a good story, and especially when you see things like there's this love for traditional martial arts when the genre is treated seriously, and that's the thing. The movie Double Dragon didn't treat it seriously. They treated this as if it was like almost like a satire of itself. It was goofy, it was campy, and it was kind of ridiculous and over the top. It was a movie made for kids basically, not even like teenagers. It was probably a movie made for 10-year-old kids, which I would argue was not the audience that was playing the video game. So I never quite understood why that was done that way. But I mean, I think it was pretty profitable, so maybe they knew better than I would. But it's a classic beat 'em up story. I don't know if it was Billy or if it was Jimmy, who's the one whose girlfriend gets kidnapped by the I literally think it was called the Black Gang, which yeah, I don't know if you could get away with saying that today. Like, all right, we're gonna go beat up the Black Gang. Yeah, that might. Oh man, I screwed this up. Sometimes when you don't pay attention, you wanna ink, you screw things up. So now I have to make this bandana a little bit thicker just so those lines don't look completely goofy. In any case, oh yeah, that's pretty bad. I might just have to black out this whole bandana and give him a different type of look. But yeah, that's right. That's what happens when you don't digitally ink, when you ink on paper over your own pencils. It You screw things up and it comes out looking worse. That's okay. Um, but one of the things that I don't like about what they've done with some of the other storyline, or not stories, but the other media, is in the cartoon and in the movie, and I think even in the comics, they show them as like 15-year-old teenagers, which, I mean, that's interesting if it's done the right way, but there's a lot more potential, and I think there's better storylines if you show them maybe as adults, maybe even like not changing things up, but if you took these guys and you were like, hey, this is the story of Double Dragon, the Dragon Brothers, 20 years after the fact, like maybe Billy's now like a out of work alcoholic or something like that, and Jimmy's kind of like got three kids at home and he's like having a midlife crisis. I don't know. I just think it would be interesting, and then they can kind of connect over some sort of event. Maybe Billy's like now wife gets kidnapped, and like Jimmy's like, dude, she was kidnapped 20 years ago. What the hell, man? And then they have to go on another adventure as like a middle aged, overweight duo that has to kind of get in shape. I don't know, just something like that. But I think it would be neat to have this because it's a very recognizable license. You know, everybody knows Double Dragon, at least people from my age, you know, late 30s, early 40s. They're very familiar with the franchise. So I think, you know, if they're not going to do anything with the video games, just make a comic, make a cartoon, make a movie, do something. This was such a big title, like a big video game. I mean, it was huge. Like every kid would walk around. Like I remember, like people would just always be pretending to be beating up invisible freaking enemies and stuff, and pretend to be one of the Dragon Brothers, you know. So um, I think it, you know, I just I did a video about Cobra Kai and how they kind of look back at the Karate Kid 20 years later, and they did a similar type of thing where they take these original characters, give them a twist, and then they like age them in the real world. I would like to see that with the Dragon Brothers. You know, just something to do. You know, the point is, there's sort of a template out there how to make a really, really good franchise, TV show, film, comic, whatever it is, by really caring about characters, treating them seriously, and then bringing them into, I wouldn't say the real world, but giving them like like these, taking these superhuman type of characters and grounding them into the reality that is life. You know, it's kind of like seeing how people who live these amazing adventures act after those adventures have ended. So, kind of something to be interested. I guess the real point about this is, you know, there's a lot of classics out there, a lot of stories, and comics themselves these days have kind of gotten stale. In that, I don't know, you look at like, you pick up an X-Men book or you pick up like an Avengers book or something, and it's just, nothing pops anymore. So I'm just trying to think like, hey, what could we do to make comics interesting? And maybe this is just one option. You know, maybe nobody recognizes Double Dragon. Maybe it's a dead license, but just trying to think of, you know, what we can do to revitalize the industry. Anyhow, that's all I got. Thanks.